The air inside my son's home always felt different from the air outside. It was a carefully conditioned atmosphere, scrubbed of any unpleasantness, smelling faintly of lemon polish and something expensive and floral that my daughter-in-law, Chloe, favored. It was the smell of money, I suppose, but not the kind of money I had ever known. My money smelled of sweat, machine oil, and decades of sacrificed sleep. There smelled of leisure. I stood in the marble-tiled entryway of the house I had bought for them, a heavy, foil-wrapped casserole dish growing cold in my hands. Through the archway, I could see the glittering decorations for their New Year's Eve party, silver and gold balloons tethered to the floor like buoyant, opulent prisoners. Laughter, light and brittle, drifted from the great room. I had told them I would be coming. Mark, my son, had been non-committal on the phone, his voice strained as it always was when Chloe was in the room with him. "Sure, Dad, stop by," he had mumbled, the words rushed, as if you're trying to get them out before a door closed on them. It was not the enthusiastic invitation I'd hoped for, but in the 5 years since he had married Chloe, I had learned to accept the lukewarm dregs of his affection. I had assumed, foolishly, that a holiday meant something. That family, at its core, still held some immutable value that even Chloe's social climbing could not entirely erode. The casserole was Eleanor's recipe. My late wife had made it for every significant occasion, a rich, bubbling landscape of cheese and potatoes that felt like a physical manifestation of love. Carrying it into this house felt like bringing an old, cherished photograph into a sterile art gallery. It did not belong, but I had brought it anyway. A foolish, sentimental gesture from a foolish, sentimental old man. Mark appeared in the archway, a champagne flute in his hand. He stopped short when he saw me, and a flicker of something, panic, maybe, or guilt, crossed his face before being smoothed over into a mask of strained politeness. He was wearing a cashmere sweater the color of oatmeal, a Christmas gift from me that I now saw was probably 2 shades too rustic for his new life. "Dad," he said, his voice a low, urgent whisper. He glanced over his shoulder, back toward the sound of the party. "What are you doing here?" The question hit me like a physical blow, a punch to the gut that left me breathless. "What am I?" "I told you I was coming, Mark. For New Year's." I brought the scalloped potatoes. I lifted the dish an inch, a pathetic offering. He wouldn't meet my eyes. His gaze darted around the foyer, landing on the ornate mirror, the designer lamp, the gleaming hardwood floors, all the things my money had paid for. He looked at everything except the man who had provided it. "Yeah, I know, but Chloe's parents are here. We were just planning on a quiet night with them, a quiet night." The peals of laughter from the other room mocked his words. Through the archway, I could see them now. Chloe, radiant in a silk dress that probably cost more than my first car, was laughing with her mother, a woman with a surgically tightened face and diamonds glittering at her throat. Her father, a man named Arthur who managed some kind of investment fund, stood beside them, looking smug and proprietary, his hand resting on the mantelpiece of the fireplace I had paid to have installed. They looked like a perfect family, a magazine advertisement for effortless wealth. I was the smudge on the lens, the uninvited ghost of a different, grimier reality. Chloe's eyes met mine over her mother's shoulder. There was no surprise in her expression, only a flat, cold annoyance. A flicker of triumph. She had known I was coming, and she had known I would be turned away. This was a power play, and I had walked right into it. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head to Mark. The message was clear: get rid of him. My son, my only child, the boy I had taught to ride a bike and bait a hook, turned back to me, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He was a stranger in a cashmere sweater. "Look, Dad, I'm sorry. It's complicated. Maybe we can do something next week." My hands went cold. The warmth from the casserole dish seemed to seep away, leaving only a dead weight. I looked around the foyer at the grand, sweeping staircase that Mark had said was his one must-have. I remembered the meeting with the builder, the extra $20,000 it had cost, an amount I had to pull from my retirement savings. I looked at the chandelier hanging above us, a cascade of crystal that had cost another 10. I had signed the check without blinking because it was for my son, for his happiness. All the checks, the down payment, a staggering sum that had liquidated the stocks Eleanor and I had so carefully cultivated for our own old age. The monthly mortgage payments, an automatic transfer from my account to theirs, a secret subsidy I had offered when Mark had been struggling to make ends meet in a house that was 3 times larger than the one he grew up in. The landscaping, the new kitchen appliances, the property taxes. My mind became a frantic, silent abacus, clicking and tallying years of sacrifice. The total was a number so vast it made me feel dizzy. And I was not welcome. I was an ATM, a silent benefactor. And now, I was an inconvenience, an embarrassing relic of a blue-collar past they were desperate to erase. A profound and terrible calm settled over me. The hurt was still there, a hot stone in my stomach, but it was being rapidly cooled by a wave of something else. Something hard and clear and final. I lowered the casserole dish, placing it carefully on the polished floor. It seemed a foolish, humble thing in such a grand house. "I see," I said. My voice was even, devoid of the tremor I felt in my chest. I looked directly at my son, forcing him to meet my gaze. For a second, I saw the boy he used to be, scared and wanting my approval. It was gone in an instant, replaced by the weary resignation of a man who had chosen his wife's family over his own. "Don't worry about next week, Mark," I said, the words precise and measured. "I think we're done." I turned and walked out the door, leaving the casserole on the floor like an anonymous donation. I did not slam the door. I closed it softly, the click of the latch sounding like the final tick of a clock that had been winding down for years. Gone. Just gone. The cold night air was a shock after the manufactured warmth of the house, but felt clean. It felt honest. The drive home was a blur of street lights smearing across my vision. Each red light was a stop-motion frame in a movie of my own life's follies. I passed the bank where I had signed the loan documents for my contracting business, the one I had sold to fund Mark's graduate degree. I passed the little park where I used to push him on the swings, my hands calloused from work, but always gentle with him. I passed the storefront that used to be a travel agency, where Eleanor and I would look at brochures for trips to Italy and Greece, trips we always postponed for a newer roof or braces for Mark or his first car. The sacrifices had never felt like sacrifices at the time. They had felt like investments in my son's future, in his happiness. They were the simple, unquestioned duties of a father. I had worked 60-hour weeks for 30 years, my body aching and my mind numb with exhaustion. Also, he would never have to know that kind of fatigue. I had built a small, successful construction company from nothing, pouring every ounce of my energy into its foundation, just as I had poured concrete for others. I did it all so he could have the life I never did, a life of soft hands and intellectual pursuits, a life where New Year's Eve was for champagne and cashmere, not for worrying about the next payroll. But I had made a terrible miscalculation. I thought that by giving him everything, he would learn gratitude. Instead, he had learned entitlement. I had given him a fish every day, and he had forgotten how to even imagine a fishing rod. He had not just inherited the fruits of my labor. He had come to see them as his birthright. Well, I got back to my small, quiet house, the house I had kept after Eleanor died, the house that felt more like a museum of a life than a place to live. The silence was deafening. It was the same silence that had greeted me every night for the past 10 years. But tonight, it had a different texture. It was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of absence, of profound and utter aloneness. I sat in my worn armchair, the one with the permanent indentation of my body, and stared at the dark television screen. The reflection showed a tired old man, his face a roadmap of worries and long hours. The phone rang the next morning. It was Chloe. Her voice was like honey laced with arsenic, a cloying sweetness that failed to mask her irritation. "Frank, darling," she began. She only called me Frank when she wanted something or when she was about to be condescending. "Mark told me you stopped by last night. We were so sorry to miss you. It was all just so chaotic with my parents arriving alive. It had been calculated. It had been deliberate." I said nothing. "Anyway," she continued, her tone brightening artificially, "Mark was so worried you were upset. You know how he gets." The implication was clear. My son's emotional state was my responsibility, another burden for me to manage. He felt just awful that you left that dish. The housekeeper wasn't sure what to do with it, the casual cruelty of it, the dismissal of my wife's memory as a domestic inconvenience, sent a spike of cold anger through me. It was a casserole, Chloe, right? Of course, a slight pause. Listen, the real reason I'm calling is that Mother and Father are here for another week, and they were hoping to do some sightseeing. But with my charity luncheon and Mark's work, we're just swamped. I was thinking, since you're retired and have so much time on your hands, you wouldn't mind driving them around? They'd love to see the old town, maybe the art museum. The audacity of it was breathtaking. I was not good enough to share a holiday with her parents, but I was good enough to be their chauffeur, an unpaid servant, a useful appliance to be switched on and off as needed. I remained silent, letting the insult hang in the air between us. Her sweetness began to curdle. Frank, are you there? It will be a huge help. And honestly, it would be good for you to get out of the house. No, I said. The word was quiet, but it felt as solid as granite. The honey vanished completely, replaced by a sharp, brittle edge. No. What do you mean, no? It's the least you could do after making things so awkward last night. You can't just show up unannounced and expect everyone to drop everything. I wasn't unannounced, Chloe. I told Mark I was coming. Well, it was a miscommunication then, she snapped. Honestly, sometimes you can be so difficult. This is why we have to manage things so carefully. You just don't understand our world. You come from a different background, there it was. The classism that had always simmered just beneath the surface of her polite facade. My background. The son of a plumber, a man who had worked with his hands his entire life. A man who had built things, real things, not just shuffle numbers on a screen like her father. My background paid for the world you're living in, I said, my voice dangerously low. A humorless laugh crackled down the line. Oh, please, don't be so dramatic. You helped out. We're grateful, of course, but you act like you're some kind of martyr. Mark is a good job. We're doing fine. On the salary of an associate professor, in that mansion, with 2 European vacations a year and a new luxury car every 18 months. The lie was so blatant, so insulting to my intelligence, that almost made me laugh. But then she delivered the final blow, the one that severed the last thread of familial obligation. You know, she said, her voice dripping with venomous pity. Eleanor would have understood. She was always so much more adaptable. She knew her place. The world went silent. The name of my wife, my Eleanor, in her mouth was a profanity. To invoke her memory, to twist it into a tool of condescension, to imply that my gentle, proud, dignified wife would have ever known her place as a doormat for this vapid, materialistic woman. It was a violation. It was an act of war. Something inside me broke. Or perhaps something was finally forged. The grief and hurt and resentment that had been churning within me for years were suddenly superheated and hammered into a single, sharp point of resolve. I did not shout. I did not argue. I let the silence stretch until I could hear her breathing, her impatience growing. Then I said very clearly, "Goodbye, Chloe," and I hung up the phone. The decision was made, not in a fit of rage, but in a moment of absolute, chilling clarity. The air in my house suddenly felt different again. It was no longer the silence of absence. It was the silence of purpose. It felt clean. The exploitation was over. The bank of Dad was closed, and the first withdrawal was going to be their house. For the rest of the day, I moved with a strange sense of calm determination. I went down to the basement, to the old metal filing cabinet where I kept decades of financial records. It was Eleanor's system, meticulously organized, a testament to her quiet competence. I pulled out the thick folder labeled Mark House. I spread the documents across the dining room table. The table where we had eaten thousands of family meals, where Mark had done his homework, where Eleanor had helped him build model airplanes. Now was a war room. I laid out the original mortgage agreement, the closing statements, the deed with their names on it. Then I started pulling out my own bank statements, highlighting the automatic transfers. Month after month, year after year. $4,372. Every single month. For 5 years. $262,320. That was just the mortgage. I found a canceled check for the down payment. $150,000. The last of my investment portfolio. I remembered the financial advisor warning me against it, telling me it would cripple my retirement plans. I had told him, it's for my son. Then came the receipts. The $10,000 for the chandelier. The $20,000 for the staircase. The $50,000 for the kitchen remodel. Chloe had insisted on just 6 months after they moved in because the perfectly good high-end appliances were the wrong shade of stainless. The $15,000 for the backyard patio and fire pit. The annual $7,000 for the property taxes. I spent 3 hours with a calculator and a legal pad. I added and re-added the columns, my hand steady. I wanted the number to be precise. I wanted it to be undeniable. When I was finished, I circled the final sum at the bottom of the page. $549,320. Over $500,000. Poured into a life from which I was now excluded. A life where my wife's memory was insulted and my presence was an inconvenience. The number did not make me angry. It made me cold. It was the evidence. It was the justification for what I was about to do. The next morning, I called my bank. I spoke to a pleasant young woman named Sarah. I calmly explained that I wished to cancel an automatic monthly payment. I gave her the account numbers and the amount. Certainly, Mr. Miller, she said, her typing clicking softly in the background. I could take care of that for you. So, to confirm, you want to stop the recurring payment of $4,372 to the account of Mark and Chloe Miller, effective immediately. That's correct, I said. My voice was even. My heart rate was steady. All right, it's done. Is there anything else I can help you with today? No, Sarah. That's all. I hung up the phone. It was that simple. A 5-minute phone call had dismantled a 5-year pillar of their entire fraudulent lifestyle. There was no fanfare, no dramatic confrontation, just a quiet, administrative act of rebellion. A flick of a switch. That evening, I took the folder of documents and the legal pad with the horrifying number circled on it out to the rusty burn barrel in my backyard. I watched the flames consume the papers, turning the records of my sacrifice into gray, fluttering ash. The smoke rose into the twilight sky, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I was not destroying the past. I was cauterizing a wound. I was burning the contract that had defined me as a martyr. Then I went back inside, opened the liquor cabinet, and took out the 25-year-old single malt scotch that my crew had given me on my retirement. I had been saving it for a special occasion. I decided this was it. I poured a generous measure into a heavy crystal tumbler, the one Eleanor had given me for our last anniversary together, and sat in my armchair. The scotch was smooth and smoky, the taste of peat and time and freedom. I was no longer a benefactor. I was just a man, and I was finally taking care of myself. A few days passed in quiet solitude. I worked in my garden, repaired a loose shutter on the house, and read a history book that had been gathering dust on my nightstand. The silence of my house was now a comfortable companion. I was rediscovering the rhythm of my own life, a rhythm that had been drowned out for years by the constant, demanding static of my son's needs. Then, as I knew she would, Chloe called. I let it ring 3 times before picking up, a small act of control. Her voice was strained, the fake honey completely gone, replaced by a thin veneer of civility stretched taut over a core of panic. "Frank," she said, skipping the darling, "there seems to be some kind of mistake with the bank. The mortgage payment didn't go through this month. They sent us a notice." "That's not a mistake, Chloe," I said calmly. I canceled the payment. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "You what? Why would you do that? It's always been automatic." "Things change. You can't just do that," she shrieked, the civility shattering like glass. "We have a system. We rely on that. What are we supposed to do?" "I imagine you'll have to pay your own mortgage," I said, the simple logic of the statement feeling like a revolutionary act. "With what?" she sputtered. "Mark's salary barely covers the club membership and my car payment. You know this. This is completely irresponsible of you." The sheer, unadulterated entitlement of her statement left me momentarily speechless. She was scolding me for not paying for her luxury car. The delusion was so profound it was almost impressive. "This is because of New Year's, isn't it?" she accused, her voice turning venomous again. "You're punishing us because you got your feelings hurt. How petty can you be? You're supposed to be the adult here." "This isn't about my feelings, Chloe," I said, my voice as cold and hard as steel. "This is about your comment regarding my wife. That was the end. You crossed a line from which there is no return. You and Mark are on your own now. I suggest you start looking at your budget." I could hear her sputtering, searching for a response, but I didn't wait for it. I hung up. I knew this was just the first tremor. The earthquake was still to come. 2 days later, she called again. This time, her tone was completely different. It was the voice she used for charity fundraising, a practiced, reasonable warmth designed to manipulate. "Frank, hello," she began, as if our last conversation had never happened. "Listen, I think we got off on the wrong foot. I was stressed the other day, and I said some things I shouldn't have. I apologize. Of course I respect Eleanor. She was a wonderful woman." The apology was as hollow as a drum, but I let her continue. "This was a tactical maneuver, not a change of heart. The thing is," she went on, "we have a bit of a situation here, and I was hoping we could count on your help just this once. My parents' flight home was canceled due to the weather, and they've been rebooked for a flight that leaves at 6 in the morning, 2 days from now. It's a terrible time, and with the storm, getting a taxi to the airport will be impossible. Mark and I have an important dinner that night we simply cannot miss. It's for his tenure track. It's critical." The request was even more audacious than the last one. After everything that had happened, after I had cut off the financial fire hose, she still believed she had the right to ask for my services, to demand my time and labor. It was a test. She was trying to see if the old dynamic could be reestablished, if I could be guilt or flattered back into my role as the family fixer. And in that moment, I saw the path forward. Not just to withdraw, but to dismantle, to hold up a mirror to their monstrous entitlement in a way they could not ignore. "What time do they need to be picked up?" I asked, my voice betraying nothing. A wave of audible relief washed through the phone. She thought she had won. "Oh, thank you, Frank. I knew we could count on you. They'll need to be picked up from our house at 3:30 a.m. That should give them plenty of time. I'll leave the front door unlocked." She saw me as so utterly subservient that she wouldn't even deign to wake up to let me in. I was to be the silent, invisible servant who would ferry away her inconvenient parents while she and my son attended a critical dinner. She even had the gall to add one final, twisting barb, cloaked as a compliment. "You know," she mused, "it's a good thing you're not a rival to my father. He can be so competitive. You're just so much weaker. It makes things easier for everyone weaker." The word hung in the air after she disconnected. She saw my years of sacrifice not as strength, but as weakness. My love as a vulnerability to be exploited. "All right, Chloe," I said to the deadline. 3:30 a.m. I'll be there. I had no intention of being there. The night of the critical dinner, I made myself a simple meal of soup and toast. I read my book. I listened to an old jazz record. The snow from the predicted storm began to fall, fat, silent flakes dusting the windows. At 10 o'clock, I turned on my phone's ringer, placing it on the table beside my armchair. I wanted to hear it. I wanted to savor every desperate, unanswered call. The day of the flight, my alarm went off at 3 a.m. as I had set it. I did not get dressed to go out. I went to the kitchen and put on a pot of coffee. The snow was coming down heavily now, blanketing the world in a pristine, beautiful silence. At 3:30 a.m., precisely the time I was supposed to be at their house, I sat down in my armchair with a steaming mug and the morning paper. My phone remained silent. They were still asleep, confident in the knowledge that the old fool, the weak man, would be there. At 4:15, the first call came. It was from an unknown number, which I correctly assumed belonged to Arthur, Chloe's father. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. A minute later, a text message. "Frank, this is Arthur. We are waiting. Are you on your way?" I took a slow sip of coffee. It was rich and black. At 4:30, Mark called. The urgency was palpable even in the electronic vibration of the phone on the table. I ignored it. Then Chloe called immediately after. Ignored. Then Arthur again. Then his wife, another unknown number. For the next hour, my phone was a constant barrage of calls and texts. They cascaded onto the screen, a digital tapestry of rising panic. "Dad, where are you? Call me." "Frank, this isn't funny. We're going to miss our flight." Arthur is furious. "You old bastard, you did this on purpose. I'm going to kill you." That one was from Chloe. The mask was well and truly off. "Mr. Miller, I must insist you answer your phone. This is highly unprofessional." Arthur tried to appeal to a sense of duty I no longer possessed. At 5:30, I silenced the phone. Not off, just silenced. I wanted to see the final tally later. I finished my coffee, washed the mug, and went back to bed. I slept more soundly than I had in years. The silent, swirling snow outside, a perfect reflection of the peace I felt inside. I woke around 9 to the sound of furious pounding on my front door. It was a frantic, uncontrolled banging that rattled the entire frame. I took my time getting dressed. I put on a fresh pot of coffee. I was in no hurry. This was their crisis, not mine. When I finally opened the door, Chloe stood on my porch, her face a mask of purple rage. Her expensive coat was dusted with snow, her hair a mess. Behind her, in a sleek black sedan half buried in a snowdrift at the curb, I could see her parents, their angry, pinched faces peering out the windows. "You!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling, manicured finger at my chest. "You did this. You left my 70-year-old parents stranded. They missed their flight. Do you have any idea how much trouble you've caused?" "They look fine to me," I said, glancing at the car. "And Arthur is 68, not 70. The small correction, the factual, unimpressed tone of my voice, seemed to infuriate her even more. "This isn't a game, you senile old fool," she screamed, her voice echoing in the quiet, snowy street. "You will pay for this. We will tell everyone what you did, how you abandoned 2 elderly people in a snowstorm. You're a monster." "Get off my property, Chloe," I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried an authority that stopped her cold. It was the voice I had used on construction sites to stop a fight or to get a lazy worker back on task. It was not the voice of the weak man she thought she knew. "You can't just—" "I can," I interrupted. "This is my house, the one I paid for with my own money. You're not welcome here. Leave now, or I will call the police and have you removed for trespassing." For a moment, she just stared, her mouth agape. She was utterly baffled. The world was not conforming to her will. The appliance was refusing to work. Behind her, her father, Arthur, got out of the car. He strode up the walkway, his face a thundercloud of arrogant fury. "Now you listen to me, Miller," he began, puffing out his chest. "You owe my daughter an apology. And you owe me the cost of 2 first-class international flights and the inconvenience you've caused." I looked at this man, this soft, privileged man who had never done a day of hard labor in his life, who had stood by and watched and likely encouraged his daughter and my son as they bled me dry for years. I felt nothing but a profound, weary contempt. "I owe you nothing, Arthur," I said. "And if you don't get off my lawn in the next 10 seconds, I'll be adding a call to the police about you." Too, he blanched. Men like Arthur, for all their bluster, feared public scenes and interactions with law enforcement. It was messy. It was common. He looked at me, truly looked at me, for the first time, and he did not see a weak, pliable old man. He saw someone who meant every word he said. He grabbed Chloe by the arm. "Come on," he hissed. "He's not worth it." As they retreated to their car, Chloe turned and screamed one last threat over her shoulder. "This isn't over. We will ruin you. Everyone will know what a horrible, vindictive man you are." I watched them drive away, their tires spinning in the snow. I did not feel fear. I did not feel anger. I felt a strange, exhilarating sense of anticipation. She had declared war, and I was ready for it. I had been preparing for it my entire life. I just hadn't known it until now. The attack, when it came, was both more public and more pathetic than I had anticipated. A week later, my neighbor, a kind woman named Mrs. Gable, knocked on my door, a copy of the local community newspaper in her hand. Her face was creased with concern. "Frank," she said, "I think you need to see this. It was an article in the opinion section, a guest column titled, 'Our Community's Hidden Shame. The Neglect of Our Elders.' It didn't name me, but the details were unmistakable. It described a heartless son-in-law, a man of humble origins who, in a fit of petty rage, had abandoned his wife's elderly, frail parents in the middle of the night during a blizzard, causing them to miss a critical flight for a medical consultation abroad. The lie about the medical reason was a particularly nice touch, designed to elicit maximum sympathy. The article painted Chloe and Mark as the dutiful, worried children trying to manage a difficult and increasingly erratic older relative. It was signed by one Margaret Fincher, a name that meant nothing to me. The words were designed to sting, to shame me into submission. A few years ago, they would have. I would have been mortified, desperate to correct the record, to explain, to apologize. But now, reading the slanted prose and the carefully constructed lies, I felt a surge of cold, clarifying power. They had handed me the weapon I needed to finish this. They thought they were fighting a war of whispers and innuendo. I was about to fight it with receipts. My first step was research. I typed the author's name, Margaret Fincher, into a search engine. It took less than 5 minutes to find her social media profile. Her page was filled with photos of her and Chloe's mother at various charity luncheons and golf tournaments. They were best friends. The article wasn't journalism. It was a coordinated attack, a hit piece commissioned by my enemies. This was confirmation, not a surprise. It was exactly the kind of underhanded tactic I expected from them. My next step was to build my arsenal. I spent the afternoon online, not looking at my own history, but at theirs. Chloe's social media was a goldmine of hypocrisy. It was a meticulously curated highlight reel of a life I had funded. There she was just 3 months ago, posting a photo from a 5-star resort in Bali with the caption, "Working hard or hardly working. LOL. Hashtag blessed." There was Mark standing next to a brand new sports car, a gift from Chloe for his birthday, captioned, "My brilliant husband deserves only the best." There were photos of extravagant dinners, designer clothes, and expensive jewelry, each post a testament to a lifestyle utterly disconnected from their actual income. I saved every photo. I took screenshots of every boastful, entitled post. Then I went to my bank and requested copies of every canceled check and bank statement related to the accounts of Mark and Chloe Miller for the past 5 years. The teller gave me a strange look as the printer churned out page after page of my own financial generosity, but I didn't care. I spent the next 2 days assembling my counteroffensive. I created 20 identical document packets. Each one contained a copy of Margaret Fincher's slanderous article. On the second page, I had a typed, point-by-point refutation of every lie, my words calm, factual, and devoid of emotion. Following that were the bank statements, with the mortgage payments and other large transfers highlighted in yellow. Then came the copies of the checks, the down payment, the kitchen remodel, the car. Finally, I included a lifestyle appendix, a collage of screenshots from Chloe's social media, showcasing the vacations, the cars, and the parties, with the date of each post clearly visible. It was a mountain of irrefutable, damning evidence. It told a story not of an erratic old man, but of systematic, voracious financial exploitation. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when I saw an announcement online. Chloe's mother was hosting her annual fundraising gala for the local arts council. It was the premier social event of the season for their set. The guest list was a who's who of the town's most influential and gossipy residents. The gala was to be held in 2 weeks. At their home, the home I had bought. The timing was perfect. They had chosen the battlefield. I would choose the moment of engagement. On the night of the gala, I did not dress in my usual work pants and flannel shirt. I went to my closet and pulled out the suit I had worn to my own wedding, and then, years later, to my wife's funeral. It was a classic dark gray wool, perfectly tailored. It was the uniform of a serious man. I put the 20 document packets into a sleek leather briefcase. I arrived at the house at 8 o'clock. The party was in full swing. Cars lined the street, and music and laughter spilled out into the cold night air. I walked up the stone pathway, the same one I had paid a landscaper to install, and walked right through the front door. The young woman hired to check the guest list looked up in surprise. "Sir, can I help you?" "I'm the father of the host," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. "I'm just fine. I walked past her into the great room. It was filled with people in tuxedos and evening gowns, holding glasses of champagne and making small talk. I saw Chloe holding court near the fireplace, looking radiant and smug. I saw Mark, hovering nervously at her elbow, looking pale and hunted. I saw Arthur and his wife, accepting compliments on their beautiful home. My home. No one noticed me at first. I was just another old man in a suit. I made my way to the bar, not for a drink, but because it was a central location. I waited. I was patient. My whole life had been an exercise in patience. Waiting for the business to turn a profit. Waiting for my son to grow up. Waiting for the respect that never came. I could wait a few more minutes. The moment came when Arthur stepped up to a small, makeshift podium to give his welcoming speech. He tapped a glass for attention, and a hush fell over the room. "Welcome, friends," he began, beaming. "Catherine and I are so thrilled to have you all here tonight in our home, supporting such a wonderful cause." He launched into a smarmy, self-congratulatory speech about community and the importance of giving back. That was my cue. "Excuse me," I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the silence like a surgeon's scalpel. Every head in the room turned toward me. Arthur stopped, mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open. Chloe's face went from a perfect socialite smile to a mask of horror. Mark looked like he was about to faint. "I apologize for the interruption," I continued, walking calmly toward the center of the room. I opened my briefcase. "My name is Frank Miller." Arthur mentioned the importance of community and giving back. I've been giving back to the owners of this home for years, and I thought it was time the community understood the full extent of that generosity. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. I began to walk through the room, handing a document packet to each cluster of guests. "Please," I said, my voice calm and steady. "Take one. It's an interesting story." People hesitated, then curiosity won over. Hands reached out and took the packets. I saw heads bend over the pages, eyes widening in shock as they scanned the first page, the slanderous article about me, and then turned to the financial documents that followed. Chloe rushed toward me, her face white with fury. "What do you think you're doing?" she hissed, trying to snatch a packet from my hand. I held it out of her reach. "I'm setting the record straight, Chloe. You want to tell everyone a story about me. I'm just providing the illustrations." I turned back to the stunned crowd. As you can see from the article on the first page, written by a close friend of the hostess, I have been portrayed as an unstable and cruel man. The story they've been telling people is that I abandoned my elderly in-laws. The truth is a little more complicated. I'll let them digest that for a moment, the rustling of paper the only sound in the room. "The truth," I said, my voice ringing with a clarity it had not possessed in years, "is that for the past 5 years, I alone have paid the $4,000 monthly mortgage on this very house. The truth is that I paid the $150,000 down payment that made its purchase possible. I paid for the kitchen. I paid for the landscaping. I paid the property taxes. The evidence is all there in your hands. The total of my help comes to more than $500,000. A collective gasp went through the room. People were now flipping through the pages frantically, looking from the bank statements to Chloe and Mark, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. "I did all of this out of love for my son," I continued, my gaze locking on a Mark, who was now ashen, unable to look at me or anyone else. "I did it so he could have a life better than the one I had. I asked for nothing in return. But recently, when I was disinvited from this home on New Year's Eve, and then my late wife's memory was insulted by my daughter-in-law, I decided the arrangement had run its course. The final straw was their demand that I act as a chauffeur for the very people who had displaced me, and the subsequent public slander when I refused. I pointed to the back pages of the packet. "Please, feel free to cross-reference the dates of the luxury vacations and car purchases you see on the social media pages with the dates of my financial transfers. You'll find a fascinating correlation. The silence was now absolute, thick with humiliation. The social standing of Chloe and her parents was evaporating in real time, right in front of their horrified peers. Their friends were looking at them not with sympathy, but with a mixture of pity and disgust. They were frauds. Their perfect life was a sham, built on the back of an old man they had discarded. I had one. The victory was not loud or violent. It was quiet, total, and devastating. I will leave you to enjoy the rest of your party, I said, my voice softening slightly. I looked around at the stunned faces, the dropped jaws, the wide eyes. I just believed the truth was a more fitting donation to this evening's cause than any check I could write. I turned and walked toward the door. No one tried to stop me. As I reached the foyer, I heard the first whispers erupt behind me, the beginning of the social firestorm I had ignited. It was the sound of a reputation being torn to shreds. I closed the door softly behind me and walked out into the clean, cold night, a free man. The months that followed were quiet. I heard things, of course. In a town this size, news of a social implosion of that magnitude travels fast. I heard that Chloe's mother had resigned from the Arts Council Board. I heard that Arthur's investment firm was suddenly being scrutinized by some of his more powerful clients. I heard that Mark and Chloe had become social pariahs, their invitations rescinded, their calls unreturned. Their world of carefully constructed artifice had crumbled. One afternoon in early spring, I saw a for-sale sign go up on their lawn. It was quickly joined by another, smaller sign, the kind the bank puts up, a notice of foreclosure. I felt a brief, grim satisfaction, but it was not triumph. It was the logical conclusion of a long and painful equation. It was simply justice, slow and inevitable. A few weeks after that, Mark showed up at my door. He was alone. He looked thin and tired, the expensive cashmere sweater replaced by a simple, frayed sweatshirt. He had lost the look of a man living a life of leisure and now bore the expression of a man acquainted with consequences. He didn't try to make excuses. He just stood on my porch, his eyes filled with a shame so profound it was almost painful to witness. "Dad," he began, his voice cracking. I am so sorry. For everything. There's no excuse. I was weak, and I was a coward. I let things get out of control. I took everything you gave me for granted, and I threw it all away. I threw you away." Tears welled in his eyes and streamed down his face. "She left me last week," he said, his voice a choked whisper. "She went back to her parents. The house is gone. Everything is gone." He looked at me, his expression a desperate plea. He was not just apologizing. He was asking for a bailout, for me to fix it one last time. I looked at my son, this broken man who was the wreck of the boy I had raised. I felt a pang of the old paternal instinct, the urge to pull him close and tell him it would all be okay, that I would make it right. But I knew, with absolute certainty, that to do so would be the cruelest thing I could possibly do. It would rob him of the one thing he had a chance to gain from all this, his own strength. "I accept your apology, Mark," I said, and I meant it. His remorse was real. "I love you. You're my son." A flicker of hope lit his eyes. "But the money is gone," I continued, my voice gentle but firm. "The bank of Dad is closed. Permanently. I will not give you another dollar. You're a grown man. It is time for you to learn how to stand on your own 2 feet. I will offer you my advice if you want it. I will share a meal with you, if you'd like to come over for dinner. I will be your father, but I will no longer be your financier." He stared at me, the hope in his eyes dying, replaced by a dawning, difficult understanding. He nodded slowly, wiping his tears with the back of his hand. "I understand," he said, his voice hoarse. "I deserve that. It was the beginning of something new, something real. Our relationship, if it was to be rebuilt, would be constructed on a new foundation, one of respect and accountability, not dependency. It would be a long, hard road for him, but for the first time, it would be his own." The final scene of this long, painful drama did not take place in a grand house or at a fancy party. It took place in my own backyard a year later. I had spent the past 12 months fixing up my house, the one Eleanor and I had made a home. I had rebuilt the back deck with my own hands, the familiar work feeling good in my bones. I had planted a new vegetable garden, the rich soil a comfort. I was sitting on a new deck in the late afternoon sun, drinking a cold beer. My sister's daughter, my niece Sarah, and her family were over for a simple barbecue. Her husband was at the grill, flipping burgers, and their 2 young children were running through the sprinklers on the lawn, their shrieks of laughter filling the air. This was family, not an obligation or a financial transaction, but a simple, easy joy. Mark was there, too. He had come alone. He had a small apartment across town now and a new, less prestigious but more honest job at the local community college. We were talking, slowly, carefully rebuilding the bridge between us one conversation at a time. He had brought a potato salad, a store-bought one, but the gesture was what mattered. He was learning. I looked around at the scene, the humble house, the happy children, the smell of grilling food. I felt a sense of peace so profound it was almost overwhelming. I had lost a fortune, but I had reclaimed my life. I had reclaimed my dignity. I was no longer a ghost in someone else's story. I was the master of my own. And for the first time in a very long time, I looked forward to the future, a future I finally controlled.